Hello from the Peterson Automotive Museum. We are here at the People's Champ exhibit talking about the impact of Ken Block. And today, we're gonna feature this car right behind me, the Ford RS200. But first, my name is Ron Zaras, AKA Ron Car, and I had the immense pleasure of working with Ken for over 13 years, shooting photos, building marketing, doing videos, and generally just doing all the media that you saw throughout that time span. So as long as I was around with Ken, he always got the question in interviews, what is your favorite car? Now, as most car guys know, that's a really challenging question. That could change day to day, event to event, sometimes minute to minute. But for Ken, there was always one answer, and that was the Ford RS200. Now, Ken was a die-hard rally fan his whole life. Some of his earliest memories of watching what rally cars do was in the 80s, the Group B era, with wild turbocharged cars spitting fire, jumping around, some of the craziest builds that the sport has ever seen. And the RS200 was his personal favorite. So then in 2017, the perfect opportunity arose. Ken and his team found a car in Norway, bought it, and brought it to the US. But of course, we're talking about Ken here, so he couldn't leave it as he bought it. It got certain changes, certain updates, and he had to make it his own. He had to make it personal. And that's where we get the car that you see here today. So to start, this is a 1986 Ford RS200, not factory in any way, shape, or form, but at the very basis of it, it is a 4-cylinder, turbocharged, all-wheel drive vehicle, one of 200 ever made. And some people will tell you that number might actually be even lower. This one has a lot of unique pieces, which we'll get to in a little bit, but in general, it is the street version of the race car that Ford fielded in the World Rally Championship in 1986. So when we first got the car, it had a traditional Ford Motorsport kind of paint job going. It had a base blue with a little bit of metallic candy and white Ford Motorsport stripes across the side. We weren't having that. Ken, at the time and for a long time, was all about matte black. But we wanted to continue the tribute of the stripes going, so we did a matte black base on the wrap, and then we did gloss black stripes on the side. Now usually Ken was known for his wild liveries and really bold, bright patterns, but remember, Ken wanted this as a street car. He wanted to be able to take this thing out, take his kids to school, maybe go get some groceries, maybe go to the mountain, do some snowboarding. So he wanted to tone it down a little bit, but still continue an homage to Ford Motorsport. So this car, from the very beginning, was built and engineered for one thing, going really, really fast down gravel stages. Now in that era, a company, if they were racing a certain car in the series, they had to make a number of them available for the public to buy for street cars. That's where the name comes from, RS200, 200 examples made, and that makes this thing pretty rare. Now, the engineering back then was a little bit different than what we know of race car engineering today. Today, everything is about tires, suspension setup, chassis dynamics. Back then, it was two things, horsepower and lightness. Safety, safety third, fourth, maybe fifth sometimes. So this thing is pretty sketchy when you really start looking underneath. We have a very simple tube chassis, some metal box tubing up front. If you look where your feet go, they're right by the wheel well. They're not that far from the front bumper. Again, everything about making it as light as possible. So the car itself has clamshells that open. The front opens like this, the back opens like this. That's for easy access for repairs when a car comes in for a stage. You smash something on the front, just replace the whole clamshell. Now overall, when you look at this, it does not look like any car from that era, and really almost unlike any other car still made to this day. And Ken absolutely loved that about this car. You have this small kind of little headlights, big wide fenders. You have a roof scoop. You have side ducts. You have side ducts below the side ducts. You have so much motorsport in one car. It's undeniable. Even if you don't really know anything about race cars, if you see this thing going down the road, you know it's special. And that's the kind of stuff that Ken loved about this car. It was so wild from an engineering perspective and a looks perspective. It was all function, not a ton of form. From the outside, the bodywork itself stays quite traditional to the car. Now, the early RS200 had a little bit of a different roof scoop setup. This one's a bit taller. Those ears that you see on the side, those are from an Evolution model. Those were models that came afterwards, where you had to add pieces. As you add them to the race car for more performance, you would have to add the same pieces to the street car to be able to comply with the rules. So that's where you see a little bit more of the ducting. But in general, no extra wide body, no bigger fenders. What you see here is mostly how the RS200 came. The biggest difference you'll see from this side are the wheels. Now Ken custom designed this wheel with rotiform through many, many rounds of design, tons of different inspiration. And what you end up with is kind of a mashup of Ken's favorite motorsport wheels all in one. So in traditional rally fashion, you have these windows on the outside, kind of mimicking a turbofan, getting the heat from those brakes out. You have that around the outside. You have a 6-spoke, a little more traditional motorsport design. That's in the middle. And you have the little touches. You have rotiform, you have the 43. Now these come in 18 inches. The usual car, as it came, had 15-inch wheels, which was standard for gravel. But because this was gonna live on the streets mostly, we upped it to 18, and honestly, filled the fender wells out quite well. Now wrapped around those custom KB1 wheels, we have Toyo Proxys tires, 275 width, all around. Now, for some people that might not sound like the biggest tire in the world, but you gotta remember, this thing is a featherweight, 2,300 pounds. That is absolutely absurd. So those 275s give you a bunch of grip, which you will need, because although the car came with somewhere around 300 horsepower from the factory, this one right here, Ken style, 700 horsepower. That's even more than the rallycross spec cars that they had in the later years. And hiding behind these wheels, we have AP racing brakes with drilled rotors. Brake pad, maybe not as aggressive as they would have run on the racetrack, but still enough stopping power to stop this thing, which trust me, you will want to do at some point because it is an absolute rocket. Now, moving inside of this car, you'll see a couple things that are a little bit different. One of the biggest differences are the seats. So the RS200, again, in the name of lightness, is a very, very small car. Now Ken was about 6'1", maybe 190-ish pounds, not the smallest dude. So we had to get as thin of a seat as we could get with a little bit of recline that allowed Ken to be able to get in the car comfortably and be all the way against the firewall to give him enough room on his feet, which was a challenge. The first time he ever drove an RS200, he noticed that the pedal box was quite small. The pedals were very, very close together. You're wearing a pair of DC shoes, you're probably gonna hit the brake and the accelerator at the same time, and that's not good for anybody, unless you're left foot braking. So most of the time that Ken drove this car, he was actually barefoot. Well, with socks, but he had to take his shoes off just to be able to drive this thing, which again, one of those unique things about this car, but he made it through it all because he absolutely loved driving it. Now for those that know the interior of an RS200, originally the car came with 2 levers inside. One was the H-pattern shift lever, and the other was a bias for the all-wheel drive system. You could, in theory, put the car all the way biased to the rear or 50-50 on the diff. When they were modernizing the car, the previous owner had put in a sequential transmission, and with that, you kind of take away that need for, the bias. You do not want to run this car in rear wheel drive. Trust me, you need all the grip you can get. So we have a sequential transmission, pull back for shifting up, push forward for shifting down. Completing the interior was a completely suede dash, suede inside, modernizing it a little bit, but keeping everything in general in the spirit as the car came. Now, speaking of street driving, another challenge that you would have is, if you take this car out, you see the gas gauge go down a little bit, you go to a gas station, you run into a little problem. This thing has a clamshell. And as you can tell on the outside here, not really a way to fill it up. The way you fill this car up is you have to lift the entire clamshell to get to the fuel cell, which is located right here. It's at your back. That classic Group B stuff where safety, put the fuel cell where it needs to be, in the center of the car for weight. If it's behind the driver, whatever. Now you will see that there is a handbrake in the car. Ken absolutely loved using the handbrake in the style of driving that he did. Unfortunately, in this car, the handbrake isn't really usable. You don't have a center diff that splits hydraulically to let you lock the rear wheels independently. We were working on a couple different concepts. Ken maybe wanted to build this thing to do pikes or maybe some Gymkhana stuff, but unfortunately, we never got to the point of really engineering a handbrake system for this. So while Ken did drive it a lot in canyons and around town, we didn't really get to do a ton of sliding and crazy stuff because that was something that we would have to re-engineer the whole entire drivetrain around. Now that the clamshell is closed, you could see all one big beautiful piece. This clear Lexan, so 80s. Another one of Ken's favorite things about this car is the single molded piece of plexi on the back. You see these cutouts right here. They're above where the turbocharger lives to let some of that excess heat out. Still, on cars that were run very, very hard and in racing, you would see warping, you would see discoloration on the plastic. Again, motorsport first, street car 12. All the priorities were about making this thing as fast as possible. Now, if you look at archival footage, if you see anything with Ken driving this car, one of my favorite things that he had on it was the license plate. We had a custom license plate made, KLRB, Killer B, the absolute craziest years of Group B rallying. Ken was super proud of that plate, and it was just a cool thing to have on this car. The last thing on the back was the taillights. Now, of course, if you're from the US, this is probably the only time you've seen this kind of taillight, but when they were building this car, engineering a whole new taillight just for their race car, that wasn't really on Ford's priority list. So when you're taking parts out of the bin of anything at Ford, what worked best? Taillights from the Ford Sierra. Same exact part, same part number. Maybe the easiest piece to replace on this whole car. So while we're back here, the first thing we'll talk about is the suspension setup. Now, back in the day, Group B, suspension technology wasn't really that advanced yet. So as you can see, it's pretty unique that this has two dampers on it. Now that served a few purposes. On the rougher rallies, you would still have a backup damper if one of them gave way, but you have two different valving speeds. Instead of in one shock, you have it spread across two. Now, the RS200 is legendary for being a very, very challenging car to drive. And that was still the truth when Ken got the car first from Norway. So he got in touch with KW Suspension, who was a partner of his at the time, and they remade a modernized version of the dual coilover setup at each corner. So if you could tell, these are double adjustable top and bottom. They went through spring rates, they went through damping rates, and they made the perfect suspension setup, custom made for Ken. 8 total coilovers, 2 on each corner, front and back. But that did make the car handle dramatically better. Speaking of power, my personal favorite piece of this car is the engine. Now, the original RS200 came with a 1.8 liter 4-cylinder turbocharged motor, but that's not enough for a guy like Ken or a lot of guys building these cars. So in this is a very, very rare, one of only 24 ever made RS200 Evolution 2 engine. That means it was bumped up to 2.1 liters, got a bigger turbo, got different internals, and that meant more horsepower. That evolved throughout the years of rally so Ford could get more power in the race car, and that ended up trickling down to the street car. One of 24. So you can imagine when we were driving this thing around, ripping through gears and everything, Ken didn't really have a care in the world, but all the tuners, they were sweating on the laptop. Maybe tuning down a little bit just to make sure you have a little bit of headroom, because you blow one of these up, it's not like you could just call the dealer and get extra parts. So speaking of power, the car didn't come with a ton of horsepower from the factory, but this one, of course, larger turbocharger, different mapping, more fuel. This car makes 700 horsepower. Now, by modern standards with GTRs and street cars these days, that may not sound like a lot, but remember, this weighs next to nothing. 700 horsepower in this is the equivalent of 1,000 plus in any other car. It makes it so scary to drive, so intimidating, but it does make some wonderful noises. So one of the many reasons Ken really loved this car was because Ken liked unorthodox things. He liked cars that did things different, a little more wild. One of those things is the intercooler. Now traditionally an intercooler is at the very front of the car, in front of the radiator. Here, they put the intercooler on the roof, right across the top. Turbocharger feeds from this side down the other side. So to give that thing air, the RS200 had to have a big roof scoop. And it started out a little smaller, the Evolution versions. The roof scoop grew and grew. Then it grew some ears on the side for ducting for air. Ken loved that stuff. He loved the visual of race cars having crazy ducting and wings and all that stuff. And this car had that in spades. Now, something to remember, and a theme we've been talking about this whole time, is Ken wanted the coolest street car ever and his favorite car ever. The problem was, this car was never made to be a street car. This car only exists because of rules at the time dictating how many cars Ford had to make for public consumption to be able to race. As a result, there's certain things you just cannot do on this car. So let's say you want to go to the grocery store. You fire this thing up, you just take off right off the bat. You're going to destroy the belt and the power steering pump, because when you turn this thing on, you have to wait for it to warm up at least a minute, probably a little bit more, because otherwise the strain on the belt, the strain on the power steering pump, it would just pop off. So that was things that we learned over time, that this maybe wasn't the perfect daily driver, but that didn't matter to Ken. He put in the time, he put in the effort, he wanted this thing on the streets, and he certainly drove it. One final little piece, a small detail when you see this car in person, is these little squares right here, front and back. That is for something called a sill stand. So in rally, you're not working on a lift. You don't really have anything that could put the car up easily. You have a jack in the front, a jack in the back. You lift it up, you put a sill stand in. Whether you're on gravel, you're on grass, you're on a hill, you can easily service the car on these stands, and that's what those holes are there for. The chassis came with those pre-built in, whether you were gonna race it or not. So despite all the challenges of driving this thing on the streets, Ken did put a good amount of miles in. We had this thing in the canyons of Malibu. It drove all around Park City, Utah. If you talk to Leah Block, she has amazing memories of this thing taking her to school, taking it to gym, to all these extracurricular activities. And we spent a lot of quality time on the streets of Park City in this car, creating content for Hoonigan. It was an amazing thing to see on the streets, and Ken absolutely loved driving. So that wraps up the general overview of this car, but although it's cool to watch these on the internet and get some details, there's nothing like seeing it in person. So come out to the Peterson Automotive Museum. This exhibit, The People's Champ, The Impact of Ken Block, goes till October 5th. Come out here, see this car in person, see the Hoonicorn, the Cosworth, all the cars that we have here. Come check them out. It's a really amazing exhibit. Thank you for watching. Appreciate you guys.